So, I'ma just throw this out there, and I expect to get more shit for this than my leftist radical politics. I like the prequels in the Star Wars series far more than I like the original trilogy. Thematically, at least. The actors...
I hate them!
Maybe not so much. I've been a bit of a Star Wars binge in the last couple of months, rewatching the old Star Wars movies, going through the shows, and going through some of the comics for the first time and losing entire goddamn days to the Wikia. I didn't eat in those days, but I can now tell you the name of every planet in the Yavin system. There's two of them. There's Findaldi, a comet called Stroiki Ketski, and Yavin. Yavin has 23 moons, just called Yavin 1 through 23. Good to see that the naming conventions in the original trilogy are stretching those creativity muscles. I enjoy the world behind the Star Wars prequels a lot more. The original trilogy is a pretty straightforward affair, especially with its politics. Fascist bad, punch him in the face. Great, good politics. A little bit boring though. There's not a whole lot of complexity put into the affair. Not that there's anything wrong with that, sometimes a simple idea is the best one. But I like to think and ponder on art, and I never really thought about Star Wars much after I finished the original trilogy, personally speaking. That's just the saying they use too, but a lot of the galaxy felt rather barren. There was Bespin and Mos Eisley, those were kind of neat I guess, but a lot of the galaxy felt kind of empty to me. It felt like a very narrow journey, you know what I mean? I never really saw much scale to the universe. I don't dislike the original trilogy in the slightest, but for how I like to enjoy it felt a bit lacking to me. The prequel trilogy, however, I thought showed a much more interesting world. I mean, we saw the Grand Galactic Republic at its height, with humans and alien species all interacting as mostly equals, and working together, bustling cities, the ins and outs of how this world operated. We got to see the Galactic Senate, we got to see plenty of unique worlds that felt vibrant and alive and all unique and teeming with various forms of life, and I got a real sense of history throughout. Hell, we got to see the Jedi Order active and doing Jedi things. Oh, I'm coming for you fuckers this video. But here's the qualifying statement for me. The Clone Wars is possibly the single biggest reason I care about the prequels so much. Dear God, there is so much talk about this show. Let's get the big one out of the way. Everyone had a crush on Ahsoka when they were kids and who watched the show, and anyone who claimed that they didn't is a fucking liar. But we're not going to focus on her right now because this is going to swing around to her later, and oh boy am I going to enjoy that. There is so much to talk about when it comes to the Clone Wars. The entirety of Star Wars could just be the Clone Wars, and I would be totally fine with that, you have no idea. From the huge number of worlds they visit, to the animation and glorious fights, to the stories they told, and the fact that this is somehow the one piece of Star Wars media to get Anakin not only right, but make him one of the best characters to fucking exist. Given what they had to work with, fucking up on Anakin's side, and he has every goddamn right to be pissed at the Jedi Order denying him masterhood. As a fundamental concept, I adore the clones. I love the idea of a clone army kind of on its own, because there's something about it that I find interesting, and because, as a plot device, I like the concept of the butterfly effect. The idea that small changes can radically change the way our lives go and the universe as a whole. And the clone army is pretty much that personified. An entire army of the same person, but through all those tiny little experiences, those tiny changes in their lives of training, practicing, fighting, and dying in drones for the Republic that they were made to fight for, they became individuals, unique human beings. My favourite was Hardcase, the glorious bastard. Rest in peace, you magnificent son of a bitch. Rex, Fives, Echo, Waxer, Boyle, Kix, Heavy, 99, and Christ knows how many others. Every clone feels like a person, a real-life human being who is doing their best to get through the nightmare that was the Clone Wars. They were brothers and they fought side by side until the end. It's almost enough to make you forget they're the bad guys in this war. If there's one thing the Clone Wars does magnificently, it's politics. I would go as far as to say that the setup for how they do things within the series is actual genius. Unequivocal genius. Give the prequels all the shit in the world, but I'll stand by the statement that their political climate was actually fantastic. Within this video, I want to look at two important things in particular. Why democracy is important, and how stagnation led to its downfall, and turned the Republic into the Empire. Let's have a look at the sides we have here. The prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars focuses on the aptly titled Clone Wars, a conflict that is waged throughout the known galaxy between the Grand Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems, or the CIS. The Republic uses clone troopers as its main army, whereas the CIS use a huge army of battle droids. The Jedi are on the side of the Republic, and the Sith are on the side of the CIS. While the clones are a lot more adaptable and able to react to environmental issues, the droids outnumber them by a healthy couple 100 billion. This also doesn't account for the fighters of the planet in either camp, like the Umbarans for the CIS, or the Naboo for the Republic, but for the most part it was the clones versus the droids. This war waged throughout more or less the entirety of known space, and was sparked off by an independent sentiment within the CIS, which, long story short, led to a confrontation on the planet Geonosis, which erupted into a full-scale war. Throughout the prequel trilogy, we learned that the Republic as a government has fallen from the glory days. It has been around for about 1,000 years by now and has picked up quite a few bad traits over the centuries. What we see within the Senate is a lot of pretty corrupt politicians far more interested in their own bottom lines, reputation, or power as opposed to, serving their people and shit. One of the heights of this was actually the entire plot of the Phantom Menace, where the world Naboo is basically blockaded from the rest of the galaxy and is invaded by a faction known as the Trade Federation over fucking taxing issues, and collaboration with the Sith, but this comes up later, and the Republic basically can't do a damn thing to stop them. And on top of that, the Trade Federation is also represented in the Republic, but bureaucracy couldn't even say, hey, maybe don't invade one of our member planets, maybe? I'm sorry, but if a democratic body can't even handle its own members going off the rails, and I think that particular democracy has failed. Speaking of which, hello United Nations, could you maybe get your shit together please? I'd like to not end up in apocalyptic nuclear hellfire if it's all the same to you. By the way, why is the Trade Federation being given political representation? If it was a worker co-op and was owned by the workers, I'd get it and maybe there'd be some kind of argument in favour for it. That's part of the idea behind the concept of anarcho-syndicalism. The key word there being anarcho, and I'm pretty sure the Republic isn't anarchist. So this is basically the equivalent of having a senator representing fucking Amazon. Considering companies have in the past gotten the US to go to war, fuck me, dude. Anyway, the first movie is basically there to show us how utterly fucked up the situation is within the Republic, as well as to set Palpatine into the seat of power for a big future plot twist. During this, Anakin gets taken into the Jedi Order despite the reservations of the Council, Obi-Wan makes him his Padawan, and hey ho, here we go, Attack of the Clones. This movie is pretty inconsequential if we're being totally honest. Nothing really happens, at least until the last half hour where the clones get introduced. Anakin and Padme have their romance thing, which is surprisingly pretty important to this video, and after that we go into, I'm gonna just say it, the best thing Star Wars has ever made. Like I said earlier, the Clone Wars as a series does honestly what I'd say the rest of the series, movies, original, prequel, or sequel failed to do, and that's world building in the highest degree. You want the galaxy expanding, or you're simply not going to get that if you go to focusing on a singular long continuous story. Well, you could, I suppose. Mass Effect managed that, but Mass Effect isn't as immense as Star Wars is, and is also a video game in which focuses on what is essentially an Antifa super soldier and the giant alien pansexual harem, so a bit different there. Star Wars primarily tells the story of a, war, and that's rarely done as a singular continuous story, so the Clone Wars does the next best thing. It tells multiple stories within arcs, small campaigns within the much larger effort to win the Clone Wars, and the many, many individuals who are within that war. We see worlds, we see individuals, and huge groups of people, alien races and their cultures, clone regiments and their generals, and how their experiences define all of them. It's pretty much the only way to give a full overview of a war this big in a world as immense as Star Wars. You notice earlier that I mentioned that the clones are the bad guys. This isn't necessarily true, but the system they fight for is one which is bad. I consider the Separatists, morally speaking, to be in the complete right. The Republic is shown time and time again to be filled to the brim of corrupted political officials who have become self-serving and using their status to leverage wealth into their own hands and barely represent their people. Some seek profit, others seek validation, and a great way to do that is to keep the war going on, which a great number of them continue to do. Of course, there are good faith actors within that system, but they're a pretty rare batch. Bureaucracy makes appeals for aid fairly slow, meaning that a system that decides everything about how a planet should be run is such a slow process, next to nothing outside the inner core world actually gets done, yet it was still subjected to massive taxes. Basically, what most Brexit voters thought was happening to Britain was actually happening here. Many of its member systems, however, were actually supporters of democracy. We see that the Separatists did have their own parliamentary system, which nearly all of its member states did respect. When a vote to call for peace with the Republic was made, the effort was made by those who voted and even those who disagreed. Well, most of them. But, I hear you say, the CIS were responsible for a huge number of war crimes and in some cases literal planetary cleanses. How could they be the morally good guys in this situation? Here's the thing, they didn't know about most of this. Well, most of them. The Nigerian slave empire is a bit harder to throw under this blanket, like the Republic was any better, but give me a couple of paragraphs. But I don't know if I can say that it was intrinsic to separatist ideology. The Nigerians took advantage of the movement to re-establish their own ends, so that doesn't make it representative of the entire Confederacy. Most CIS representatives were mostly responsible for governing their own planet, leaving the actual fighting of the war to the Trade Federation's droid armies and their own militias. They never actually said, hey, let's put Twi'leks in front of cannons as live shields so those moral Puritan Republic forces won't shoot at us and we could shoot them out of the sky without risk. This is great! No, those orders came from the higher-ups within the CIS hierarchy, which, unbeknownst to the Parliament, was led by the Sith, who didn't give a damn about such petty things like civilian casualties, lives, ethics, and in many cases common sense. Lots of their field commanders were droids on top of that who would obey any orders they were given without question, even if they would mortify an ethics board. But the will of the people within the Confederacy wasn't within those atrocities in the slightest. Like I said, many didn't even know this was going on. All the CIS wanted to do was leave a bureaucratic nightmare that was making their worlds weaker and poorer. A nightmare the clones and the Jedi fight to maintain and restore the supremacy of. Just because we follow them doesn't mean they're automatically the good guys. I mean, they're slaves. The clones are slaves, guys. They were made to be a slave army. That's pretty bloody unethical. I'd say using droids as opposed to living, breathing, thinking human beings would put the CIS above the Republic in terms of morality there. Sure, the Jedi treated their clones fairly well, but a well-treated slave is still a slave. This doesn't exactly absolve the CIS for the fucked up shit their armies were up to. That's still on them. Might have had a few more thousand intermediaries between me and Dooku personally. Then again, he might have just killed them. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the system that the CIS wanted to create is a lot better than the corrupt system that the Republic seeks to maintain. What they wanted was self-determination. Something that the Republic had been eroding away over time because of corruption, taxation, classism between the inner core and the outer rim, human-centric attitudes, and a generally ineffective system of governance. They wanted to either restore democracy to the Republic, and if that wouldn't work, they'd go off and do a democracy on their own, which actually did represent the will of the people. Going back to the subject of battlefields, contrasting the CIS with the Republic is an interesting one to note. The Republic tended to be a lot more ethical in how it waged war, taking efforts to avoid excessive damage in certain areas, being mindful of civilians, and actually caring about what happened to its soldiers. Compared to the Separatists, they were a lot more approachable, warm, and reasonable, which is why a lot of Separatists we see within the Clone Wars eventually return to the Republic. The way the Republic wages its wars is dramatically more ethical and moral as far as, state-sanctioned violence goes, but that doesn't really change the system they're fighting for. The Republic is still a corrupt, bordering stagnant system which caused enough harm to make a secession movement popular enough to begin with, and the efforts to actually deal with that corruption are minimal at best. But no one does anything. And that brings me to the Jedi, and I think it's safe to say that the Jedi Order is stagnant as fuck. If you've watched my Politics of My Hero Academia video, you know I'm a radical leftist, even by the standards of other radical leftists, so it naturally follows that I have a deep dislike for conservatism. And if there was ever a case for why conservatism needed to be wiped off the map, it's the Jedi Order. The Jedi are supposed to be preservers of peace who are dedicated to the light side of the Force. Through a series of events throughout the expanded universe, they become what are essentially servants of the Republic in order to maintain peace and justice throughout the galaxy. And you've probably already guessed my problem here. The Republic is corrupt to its absolute core, and it's not even as if its members of the Jedi Order aren't aware of this. Many of them are, but they continue to serve the Republic because that's just apparently their duty. The Jedi Order is conservative, aggressively so, and this is pretty much the entire reason it fell. See, Anakin was rumoured to be the chosen one, the one who would bring balance to the Force, and tests proved that he had a strong connection to the Force, which implied he could be the one to fulfill that prophecy. Issue there was he wasn't at the age the Jedi normally take children into the Order, so a portion of the Jedi Council wanted to not accept him into the Order in the first place, even when faced with the possibility of him being the chosen one and him being right in front of them. Here we begin to see one of the earliest signs of the conservative mindset of the Jedi Order. Things must be done a certain way to entertain them. Being done a different way is controversial. This translated to Anakin having a much harder time than most in the Jedi Temple. He was more isolated, far ahead of his peers, but relegated to studying on their level because that's how things were supposed to be done. Obi-Wan tried to teach him in different ways, but those issues still remained. Anakin even considered leaving the Jedi Order at one point because of all of this. Further down the line, he ended up being denied masterhood because of his age and... I'm not actually sure. Let me check this. Because he didn't get a Padawan to knighthood. Oh, fuck you, Jedi Council. Go to all various levels of fucking hell, you myopic twats. You fucking dicks. I'd like to remind everyone here that these are the same dipshits that made Ahsoka leave the Jedi Order in the goddamned first place. And they were ready to knight her for their absolute fuck-up with blaming her for a crime she didn't commit. This is such a myopic fuck you, I'm actually kind of mad about it. And that, of course, leads to Anakin being more susceptible to the dark side, which he falls to. And hey, guess what, Council? You're all fucking dead. Ooh, great job. Truly, your traditions have saved you from this folly. You know the reason why Anakin wanted to become a master in the first place? It was because the masters gained information to secret, Jedi info that Anakin believed could help him save Padme's life following the visions he had of her death. That was his main concern, apparently. Obviously, ego was a part of it, but that didn't take away from anything. And he was denied this on a technicality. See, this is where my issues with conservatism lie. Conservatism is an ideology based off of, more than anything, fear. The fear of the unknown, the fear of the other, the fear of change. In modern politics, conservatives will fight tooth and nail to prevent social changes which are all practically proven by all forms of sociological and statistical data. It was conservative thought that opposed the abolition of slavery. It was conservative thought that opposed women's suffrage. It was conservative thought that banned gay marriage. And at the time of writing, it is conservatives that tried to persecute trans people, in spite of all data on the subject validating the existence of transgender people, suggesting that they aren't a threat to cis women. That is to say, women who were born female and identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth, don't commit crimes at nearly the same rate as cis people, and have been around in society for millennia, and not once has any of the fear-mongering about them sneaking into bathrooms to commit sex crimes or whatever been validated on a broad scale. In the face of change, or something they don't understand, they will twist, turn, squeal, lie and do anything to avoid having to address the world as it actually is. And it hurts people in the name of what? Traditions and customs that will be dead in a few centuries, or even years anyway? Let me entertain a hypothetical here. Does anyone here watching actually believe that their home nation is even remotely similar to how it was culturally about 100 years ago? 50 years ago? 10 years ago? I live in England, for example, and to claim that my country was even remotely similar to how it was 100 years ago would be completely insane. 100 years ago, the British Empire was at its absolute height, and we'd just come out of the First World War. The first wave of feminism was making its presence known. The culture of the country was so insanely different that to me it would be completely unrecognizable. I might be able to speak the language, but that'd be about it. And this was in an era where liberalism was far more popular. Socialism was far more popular. But the culture of the nation changed until we ended up where we are today. We didn't get socialism, but don't worry, we're working on that. My point is that conservatism is a losing battle inherently. You cannot preserve a culture, nor can you preserve a nation. That's not how these things work. Culture changes no matter what, be it the left or the right wing in power. Eventually the culture we live in today will be dead and replaced with something else. What we can do is affect where that culture goes. And even in that scenario, conservative thought goes down a dark route. Conservatism tends to fetishize hierarchy. That some people are just better than others, and therefore others should be treated differently. This tends to make conservatism a breeding ground for feelings of supremacy and a hatred of the other. Suddenly, the other is a dangerous beast that needs to be kept in place in order for the true rulers of the region to reign unopposed. In short, if you believe that the idea that socialism is the slippery slope that leads to communism, then you also have to believe that conservatism is the slippery slope that leads to fascism. The difference is, it is much easier for conservatism to slip into fascism because fascism can work within our current capitalist society. Socialism cannot. And that's what happened to the Republic. Palpatine blamed both the Confederacy and the Republic during the Clone Wars, allowing him to gain more and more political clout within the Republic, holding onto power for far longer than he should have. There were those who noticed this, and some who even resisted this, but the Jedi made no moves against him. Servants of the Republic as the Jedi were, they were also a conservative group whom did not step outside their bounds unless it became prescient to do so, only ever directly confronting Palpatine after Anakin revealed that he was in fact Darth Sidious. Remember that corruption I mentioned? Well, it's pretty easy to play a system when it's filled with corruption. Play it right and you can get people to support a system that they benefit from. They don't care what happens to the people, as long as they benefit. And Palpatine used this to his advantage. By the time anyone realized what was really going on, Palpatine had more or less the entire secured galaxy under his rule, and bit by bit the old Republic, now the Empire, turned from a beacon of democracy into a fascist human-centric hellhole. So, why is democracy important? And what does that have to do with Star Wars? The fundamental principle of democracy is will of the people. We are supposed to have political power in how the society we live in functions, and we exercise that power through voting. If you live in a nation like the UK like me, you take part in a representative democracy. We vote in representatives whom we feel will represent our interests, and they go to the capital to represent our will. Studies show that more and more people are becoming disillusioned with democracy in the modern day, as they feel their interests aren't being met, or that their vote doesn't matter, or that there is no one that represents their interests. Corruption in our own democracies makes this feeling all the more exacerbated. Gerrymandering, for example, is a tactic often used in the United States Republican Party in order to mess with districts to make their votes worth less. This allows them to subvert the democratic process and win elections and votes that they by all rights should not have won. When you're in that sort of system, it's certainly hard to remain enthusiastic about democracy. When you stop to think about it, we don't live in a particularly democratic society. We spend a bit of time every few years to maybe, if we're not too smothered with work, go to a poll and vote for a representative, and that's democracy? Meanwhile, we spend the majority of our times in offices and workplaces where we get next to no say in how the workplace is run. And on top of that, corporations are getting powerful enough to just buy votes from representatives to push for policies that benefit the rich, while the rest of us struggle to just get through the day. It's not surprised that faith in democracy is becoming lower. To meme a little, I love democracy. My reason for it is thus. I want people to be able to have power against the rulers of our society to protect themselves against those who have that power. I support democracy for the same reason I support the right to bear arms. Pragmatic self-defense. It's for this reason that I'm a socialist. I wish for this sense of democracy to be extended into the workplaces, so people can have a sense of power in the environments they work. Is your manager not representing your interests and keeps peeking on the women? Yeet that fucker out and vote him out of power. That, to me, is true democracy. And that should be extended to every human and sentient creature alive. Democracy requires certain things from us, though. We need to be educated, we need to be aware, and we need to hold our leaders accountable. Every time a cut to, say, education is made, we need to ask why. It is important to always be skeptical of the state. Is this cut necessary, or is it an excuse to subvert democracy by making sure the next generation are less educated? This is part of the concept called permanent revolution by Daddy Karl Marx, that even if you get your ideal society, you must always be skeptical and critical of the government, and you must keep pushing for your interests of your class. How we utilize democracy in the modern day isn't fantastic. I will be the first to agree with that. It needs to be reformed and restructured. But democracy to me is the strongest system of governance out there. The people should have the power, not those who rule. Those who rule should be subservient to us. Conservatives tend to play good lip service to that, But then they'll do shit like voting not to bring witnesses to an impeachment trial in order to obscure justice. Yes, I am calling the Republican Party fascist because it literally meets the definition. Speaking of conservatism, there's a Star Wars fan comic I'm a huge fan of. It's called Contrasts, and going back to my fan fiction origins, it's a ship's fic. It focuses on the relationship between Ahsoka and Barriss Offee. It's canon divergent, guys, don't worry, this never happened. This comic has basically become the equivalent of my antidepressants, which I should probably get prescribed to me before the NHS gets bought. It is pure teeth-rotting fluff, and I love everything about it, and I cannot stress how much I want every single person conceivable to read this. Relationships are forbidden within the Jedi Order, so you have these two Padawans clearly pining over one another, or trying to figure out these feelings for one another in a literal constant war zone, while neither of them have a clue what they're doing. Because the Jedi are forbidden from attachments, though they're not actually supposed to act on those feelings when they start developing them for one another. Though Ahsoka does just give up at one point and just stops even pretending to be subtle, which one must admit is fucking funny. We're shown constantly throughout the story that Barriss in particular is absolutely miserable going through the war and deals with crippling depression and self-hatred for the things she's done. Has anyone ever been on the verge of crying and then you eat something and that's what sets you off? Fuck me, this panel was strong. I wanted to hug this girl myself. I really do not want to spoil this comic because god damn do I want people to experience it for themselves. But I do want to briefly touch on the themes of this comic, one of which being the refusal of conformity. Conservative areas tend to be very hierarchical and have strong social expectations. To veer outside those expectations typically doesn't end well. There's one point within the comic that Barriss does attempt to conform to how Jedi are supposed to act without spoiling what happens or what she does. When we next see her, she is noticeably sullen and downright miserable, forcing herself to reject what she wants because coming back to the way things are supposed to be is too hard for her, she claims. She tries her damned best to be a good Jedi. God damn it, she really does try her best, but it's just so sad. And then Ahsoka shows up and then she can actually crack a smile for once in a while. Like, why? Why is this not the norm? Why are the Jedi forbidden from forming relationships? Where did that rule come from about forming attachment? Being wrong for a Jedi? Oh, please. Ki-Adi-Mundi got an exception and he was on the Jedi Council. Apparently it's to stop the Jedi from falling to the dark side through fear and jealousy. Yeah, because that's worked out great, didn't it? Let's call it what it is. Tradition for the sake of tradition. What it is, and an attempt to stop people from falling to the dark side. Great. Except literally everything is a way to fall to the dark side. Being too angry, being too sad, being too enthusiastic, having ambition, wanting power, having fear. There are 1,000 restrictions put in place to make the Jedi into stoic beings so the risk of falling to the dark side is minimized. But instead all it did was create people who became bitter with the Jedi Order, who were hurt through it, but in many cases stayed with it because there was nothing else for them. Most were raised by the Jedi, and that's some nice indoctrination right there. Let's kidnap a bunch of children, then drag them to a fucking religious temple in the farthest corners of the galaxy. Yeah, this is great. And then those same people noticed the contradictions and became bittered and left. The Jedi were forbidden from experiencing any of the light they were sworn to act in the name of, and because that light was normalized, because he had to hide it, was it any wonder Anakin turned to the dark side? Not to mention the fact that the Jedi Council never trusted him. None of this had to happen. Seriously, if the Jedi Order hadn't had any of this stupid restriction on personal relationships, or if they had just said to Anakin just once, "Hey, nice work, you did a good job," instead of treating him with mistrust after all the amazing shit he did in the Clone Wars, maybe none of this would have happened, even if Palpatine was trying to mess with his mind. But no, none of the Jedi have gotten their rocks off in the last 10 centuries, so be damned if anyone else is. We could have had constant this, but instead we ended up with this. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that conservatism leads down dark paths, sometimes not always foreseen, and sometimes not even by those who ascribe to those tenets, but by the people who are raised under them. For all their talk of not giving into emotions, like all conservatives, the Jedi Order was ruled by one thing: fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the risk of falling to the dark side, fear in their own ability to fall into it, and that led them to become a conservative organisation. And conservatism leads to stagnation, and stagnation leads to extinction, and is the very death of democracy. It is only when we surpass that fear and accept new ideas and move forward that we abandon the risk of falling into the darkness. I want humanity's future to be bright. I truly do believe in democracy. It's down to us to make it better. Thank you for watching this video. I mentioned the fan comic Contrast in this video, and I have left links to it in the description below. Please, for the love of God, do go read it. I cannot stress enough how much it is worth it. And the chances are I'm literally reading it as you're watching this. Hopefully this video was a lot better than my My Hero Academia one on account of me having an actual decent microphone for once. I managed to get a hold of one and I think it sounds miles better than using the built-in microphone for my laptop, so actually good quality from here on out. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking, commenting and subscribing to my channel. YouTube is a hell site, so it really does help out with the algorithm. I have a Twitter at QuirkQuart if you want to follow me there too, if you want to see politics and media and fandom stuff. And probably me just being an idiot. My DMs are open on there, and I will see you next time. See yous.